The Gay Agenda, Political Conspiracies, Conversion Therapy. Previously, Political Conspiracies, efforts to secure gay rights by conspiring with liberal elites within the legal and legislative systems. December 15th, 1973. The American Psychiatric Association decided today that homosexuality is not a mental disorder. It never was a medical decision. It was a political move.
Political stances seem to override any scientific results.
In this episode, we will review the effect of LGBT political activism overriding medical science and its impact on client-centered therapeutic choice for LGBT persons and mental health professionals.
It's now considered unethical to treat homosexuality, and any psychiatrist who attempts to change the sexual orientation of his patient can face professional censure. If a gay person finds his sexual preference disturbing, if he's interested in becoming heterosexual, and there are many people who fit this description, the APA guidelines suggest that the therapist counsel his patient that change is impossible.
Is it unethical to treat unwanted homosexuality? Should healthcare professionals face professional censure for doing so? Should patients be counseled that change is impossible?
The stance that you can never change. It's absurd. All you have to do is find one exception and it knocks down the never.
Nung natakpan ko ang Islam, nagkaroon ng direksyon yung buhay ko. Ayoko na rin balikan yung mga bagay na masasabi ko na hindi siya masaya.
And nobody was more shocked than me when I began to notice the curves of women.
My same-sex attraction has significantly reduced.
I no longer have the desire to act on my attraction.
The evidence that we can show is that change is possible.
About whether or not reparative therapy works. The committee that considered this would not allow anyone on the committee that does reparative therapy. This kind of bias prevails in the APA, all under the scientific aura. Political correctness rules, not science.
The entire field has become so politicized, and there's really now only one correct point of view that you're allowed to have without paying a high professional or academic price.
Should the government have the power to pry into the very private conversations of the counseling room, to treat certain topics as off-limits, and to threaten those who discuss off-limit topics with crushing fines? New York City officials passed a law that blocked people in New York from seeking out professional counselors to help them move away from unwanted same-sex attraction. How did the city enforce this law? By levying fines on therapists who offered this type of counseling. New York City threatened fines of up to $10,000.
My position is that the person is the one who decides what they want to do with their orientation. And if somebody decides to be gay, I respect that. But I also respect the right to disagree. That's not allowed. You only hear one side of the issue.
How has this one-sided narrative affected Singapore? Current research indicates the inefficacy and possible harmful effects of conversion therapy. The Singapore Psychological Society defines conversion therapy as psychological and therapeutic interventions with the primary aim of altering one's sexual orientation. These techniques include abstinence, gender lessons, prayer, or reliance on a higher power to change orientation. Local LGBT activist Heckin Unicorn. Does conversion therapy work? No, it doesn't. Is conversion therapy okay if people seek it voluntarily? No, it isn't. Medical professionals agree that conversion therapy at best has no scientific basis and at worst causes harm on participants. Medical professionals agree that conversion therapy causes harm on participants. Is this true? The American Psychological Association reported, recent studies do not provide valid causal evidence of the efficacy of SOCE, sexual orientation change efforts, or of its harm. There are people who perceive that they have been harmed, just as there are people who perceive that they have benefited from it. In November 2020, the US Court of Appeals was presented with documents claiming alleged harm caused by SOCE When examined closely, these documents offer assertions rather than evidence. A report from the American Psychological Association found a complete lack of rigorous recent prospective research on SOCE. The report concludes it has no clear indication of the prevalence of harmful outcomes among people who have undergone SOCE. There is a lack of evidence to conclude that SOCE, commonly referred to by LGBT activists as conversion therapy, is harmful. August 2021. Efficacy and risk of SOCE. Exposure to SOCE was associated with significant declines in same-sex attraction, identification, and sexual activity. Conversion therapy causes harm on participants. Why do LGBT activists propagate such claims? In May 2020, nominated MP Ms. Anthea Ong asked whether the Ministry of Health would consider stating an official position against conversion therapy, as it is not approved by expert bodies in psychology, including the American Psychiatric Association, APA, and the British Psychological Society, BPS. Since we've covered the political motivations of the APA, we now briefly look at the BPS. In 2014, the BPS was among several organizations that contributed and supported the UK's consensus statement on conversion therapy. What's in the consensus statement?
First, what is conversion therapy? Part of the answer, we believe, note that phrase, it has the potential to cause harm. Why do therapy professionals consider it unethical? We believe it would be irresponsible and potentially damaging. What does research tell us about conversion therapy? We believe that it would be likely to reinforce the notion that these feelings are wrong or abnormal. These answers are not scientific answers. They are ideological. Science has been replaced by ideology.
Science has been replaced by ideology. Do you agree? What assumptions are these beliefs founded on?
If you assume that homosexuality is an entirely healthy option, that people are born with their sexual orientation, and then anyone who wants to alter sexual desires is trying to do something that is unnatural. If you approach it with the assumption that the natural order of sexuality is male and female for the procreation of children, and therefore this is the natural approach, then you're more likely to be sympathetic to people who have homosexual desires and want out of it.
What is your view on the natural order of human sexuality? What happens to people who offer help to those who want out of homosexual desires?
Und es ist sehr, sehr schwierig, über unsere Arbeit offen zu sprechen. Dann gibt es Proteste, Politiker, die protestieren, homosexuellen Verbände, die protestieren, erfahren tatsächlich auch viel Anfeindung von Hassmails natürlich, über Bedrohungen, über Demonstrationen gegen uns und so weiter.
Our primary objective is to cow and silence them as far as possible.
In 2013, when I was testifying in the state Senate of New Jersey, they were considering a bill that would have banned sexual orientation change effort therapy for minors. A transgender activist, Brielle Godani, spoke about being sent to a conversion therapy torture camp called True Directions. There wasn't a shred of truth. What it did exist was a 1997 movie starring drag queen RuPaul. In this satire, parents sent their gay or LGBT identified children to this fictitious camp called True Directions to, quote, turn them from gay to straight. We exposed this story as lies. We called reporters, we said, you know, this story has been entered into evidence, into testimony, and this is affecting children's lives in New Jersey. And they wouldn't touch it, they wouldn't expose it, they completely shut us down, wouldn't allow our voices to be heard. Tragically, that bill got through the legislature and was signed by the governor in August of 2013.
In favor of gay rights, the intransigents will eventually be effectively silenced by both law and polite society. How do we see this playing out in Singapore? in May 2021, LGBT activist organizations Ugajaga and Pink.sg submitted a joint report to the United Nations. They urged the Singapore government to explicitly prohibit all clinical practices that seek to change one's sexual orientation and/or gender identity. In June 2021, local LGBT activist Hackin Unicorn proposed prohibit medical professionals from suggesting, endorsing, or prescribing conversion therapy practices. Explicitly categorize conversion therapy as a form of domestic abuse. Explicitly include conversion therapy as a form of ill treatment under child abuse laws. Outlaw conversion therapy practices. Ban conversion therapy. Why would local LGBT activists advocate for such a ban? In Mobilizing Gay Singapore, Lynette Chua wrote, "Gay activists in Singapore treat the choices between legality and illegality as merely tactical, no more than a means to an end, and use it scrupulously to seek social change in face of its power and control." Ban conversion therapy to effect social change. Is this ethical? How would such a ban impact LGBT persons, healthcare professionals, or Singapore society? In March 2021, the Singapore Academy of Law published Conversion Therapy Bans, Enshrining a Contested View of Human Nature in Law by Darius Lee. Bans on conversion therapy infringe upon numerous aspects of individual or group autonomy by elevating the perceived consensus and standards among mental health institutions into law. It is clear that forms of conversion therapy involving violence or coercive or involuntary conduct ought to be banned. However, voluntary non-coercive forms of talk therapy or religious counseling or prayer addressing unwanted desires or behaviors are categorically different. Given the lack of conclusive evidence of harm and that at least some people receive or perceive a benefit from voluntary participation in talk therapy, a ban which limits individuals' choices of voluntary therapy options cannot be easily justified. Should people have the right to freedom of therapeutic choice?
I believe that even a gay person should be able to explore heterosexuality if that's what they would like to do.
Therapy might be a healthy process if the person who is self-identifying as needing that therapy is there with their own consent, is there with a willingness to achieve something that is prescribed by themselves.
What is clear is that some people can and do change, and that the research shows that the risk for harm is not any different from any other intervention. Now, that doesn't mean that people should be forced to change. It just means that they have a right of that option.
The IFTCC is here to support the rights and freedoms of those who are experiencing unwanted same-sex and gender confusions, who are unwilling to be forced into counseling approaches that are simply gay-affirming and offer no alternatives.
Some people identified as gay or trans, and they had LGBT experiences, but they didn't find it fulfilling. Some people want to live according to their beliefs and values that bring them joy. Some people feel their LGBT feelings and behaviors were brought upon them from trauma. They want the right to heal. Some people have LGBT experiences, but they're in an opposite sex relationship. Everyone should have the right to walk away from sexual practices or gender experiences that don't fulfill them or work for them. No one should take away their freedoms and rights.
The client is in the driver's seat. The licensed psychotherapist says we can use evidence-based treatments to approach your childhood traumas or any sexual addictions you may have. And as that's resolved, the sexuality begins to change on its own.
The changes in sexual orientation, they're a result of a much deeper process of understanding myself, of getting myself unstuck from where my childhood left me.
Pastor Ian To, co-founder of True Love, is a religious organization that shares stories of individuals who have come out from LGBT. I wish to be absolutely clear that we are firmly against coercive, manipulative, and abusive practices. I also take the view that therapy or help should only be rendered when sought voluntarily. True Love Is supports the right of people who seek help voluntarily with competent helping professionals and religious leaders of their choice. Brian Shen, a Singaporean professional counsellor and author of The Unaffirmed Core. Free choice must always be respected. Gay conversion therapy of unsound precepts can be banned. However, sound therapeutic assistance that's able to identify and attend helpfully to the underlying factors that contribute to same-sex attractions and the associated problems should not be lumped together. We must not conflate the two and ban it all.
If the goal is to completely ban anyone from having access to somebody who professionally could help me to find my goals, my life path, you're going to tell me that that's freedom to ban me from that right?
If people want to live in a lifestyle, then they can continue to do that. But to take that option away from other people and to push a narrative that, to me, is not true is extremely harmful.
My name is Joseph. I'm still struggling in homosexuality. The struggle is real, but I'm in an overcoming journey.
For people that have been struggling in their life with same-sex attraction, for those people who want help, banning that therapy, banning that help would be an abuse of human rights.
Banning conversion therapy is an abuse of human rights. Do you agree? Conversion therapy. Ever thought of how LGBT activism may have influenced your perspective? On what basis are your views on conversion therapy founded on? How would you support someone with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender incongruence? In the next episode, we will review affirmative treatment. Follow us on